Hello, all you beautiful constellations. It's been a hot minute. I started college and it just wasn't in my brain power to really film or even really talk about books critically, which is what I wanted to initially do. And now I've kind of gotten back into the itch of wanting to film something. I will say from here on out, it might not always be about books. My Instagram has definitely had a shift to it. So we'll see. I want to be able to start doing this more for me again and not thinking about making this good by YouTube standards. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me. Mostly what got me back into wanting to make this video was I got a comment from one of you guys, Sunny Tyler. Thank you so much for your comment on my last video ranting about Loki in Rick Riordan's Ship of the Dead. And Sunny was so lovely as to comment just more opinions and representations of Loki as opposed to mythological Loki. I'll talk more on that later, but that's essentially what made me want to film this video, because I recently read some books, two of which involved Loki. So I thought it might just be nice to talk about the books that I've read recently to sort of get back in the swing of things. So without further ado, let's get talking. So I'm going to talk about 3 books. And the first book, I have thoughts. So the first book I'm going to be talking about is Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. This was a DNF, unfortunately. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. It's a Rainbow Rowell book? I love Rainbow Rowell. I'm sorry. I love her. This did not feel like a Rainbow Rowell book. For those of you who don't know what it is, it follows 2 teenagers, Eleanor and Park, set in one year. I think it's 1981. It's in the 80s though. And they sort of start to like each other and decide to pursue a romance, even though they know that young romances don't really last forever and that they're doomed to fail eventually. So they just decide to give it a shot, because why the heck not? They're young and that they can do it. So I mentioned that this takes place in the 80s. That's important because it feels like we're constantly being reminded that this takes place in the 80s, even though honestly it could have been set in any time period, or I guess any modern time period from the 70s on and it still would have worked, even if the main part of what starts their relationship is that they both listen to music on a Walkman. People still listen to music on a Walkman. Isn't Sony coming out with a new Walkman? I don't know, but my point is it could have been set now. I don't know specifically why it took place in the 80s, except it feels like a bit of an excuse to write some pretty racist stereotypes. So I'll give Rowell the benefit of the doubt that she wanted to explore the concept of sort of dealing with race in the 80s, with, people making a lot of jokes and stereotypes and that just being seen as okay. And so maybe she wanted to explore a little bit about what being a teenager during that time would have been like. But it mostly comes across as her keeping it in the 80s so that she can get away with not knowing how to write an Asian character. And that was really disappointing. So at first I was a little torn on this because a lot of the stereotypes and racist remarks that Eleanor makes in her point of view, I guess, make sense for the narrative of the story. She's white, she's growing up in a household that isn't very conscious about other people at all. She grows up with an abusive stepfather, and she's very used to constantly having to be on the defensive and putting people down in order to be able to feel like she's stable. And so it makes sense for an arc to take place. I only really got like less than halfway through, so I don't know if narratively is part of an arc for her. I don't know if by the end she sort of changes her perception on Park and his family. I don't know. But it is interesting that we even get a lot of stereotypes through Park's point of view. And again, this could be an exploration on Park being biracial. He has a white father, he has an Asian mother. I believe she's from, I should look this up actually. I really don't remember where she's from. They kind of throw it out in a comment in the beginning, and then Park is frequently referred to as that Asian kid, like for the rest of it. So I can't remember. So I had to Google it because I never found it in the book. His mom is from Korea. He's half Korean. And his dad is specifically Irish. But it just really is interesting, Park's perception of his mother. It feels like it might have been an attempt to portray internalized racism. Like I said, Park is referred to as that Asian kid by like everyone in the story. So he is used to having to sort of try and portray himself as white as possible, and that includes sort of going with a lot of the jokes that his friends will make. But even his point of view, we get some depictions of his mother's accent that are less Park's perception, and I guess more Rainbow Rowell being a narrator, and it just felt really insensitive. It feels like an attempt that was trying to be more descriptive. I'll get to this later, but I did read Neil Gaiman's American Gods, and there are a lot of different people with accents in that book, and Neil Gaiman sort of writes how they sound without really talking about it, whereas Rainbow Rowell talks about the Park's mom's accent, specifically pointing out that it's an accent, and because she's a white woman writing about an Asian character, it does come off as a little ignorant and not just like a description of Park's mom. That could just be my opinion. I don't really know, but it just felt really ignorant. Now, onto the romance, which is the main part of this story, and what I still couldn't get behind. So it feels like a simplified kid version of Normal People by Sally Rooney. I don't know which came first. I forgot to look that up before going into this video. But I loved Normal People. This is not Normal People. This is nowhere near Normal People. This is taking Normal People and stripping it down so you have none of the complexity and all of the issues. Rooney made it a point to have her characters sort of be aware of their actions, and so they're constantly in dialogue with themselves and each other about whether what they're doing is right, and trying to figure out what prompts their actions and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it helps that we follow those two characters through a larger period of time, and so even though they start really young when they're like teenagers or something, and they're not really thinking about that, and then we see them kind of grow and become young adults, and of course they start thinking more about their relationship with each other and their relationships with other people, and it just felt like all of the toxic things that they were doing to each other were still being analyzed and really heavily looked at, whereas in Eleanor and Park there's a bit of a start of that, but then it gets completely ignored. Park has some internal monologues about why he's being mean to Eleanor when he first meets her, and she's the new kid at school and everyone's bullying her, and he goes along with it. But then like once he befriends Eleanor, he's suddenly really in love with her and kind of throws all of the icky stuff that he did to her out of the window. And he has this weird monologue where he's like trying to remember what he first thought of her, and he's like, how could I have thought that? That's so weird. She's so nice. But there's no acknowledgement of him ignoring her and thinking really meanly about her, and he's just trying to ignore all that and like make things all sunshine and rainbows. Again, maybe they bring it up later. I didn't get there. I didn't care to get there. And maybe this is just the fact that this is middle grade, and so there's has to be some kind of simplification. Not that middle grade and younger people can't read into complex situations, because they can, but I guess there was an attempt to just make it more understandable to younger readers. And also the plot is shortened to 1 year, whereas, like I said, with normal people it follows a very long time. And so with the time allotted being only 1 year, you have to just make things go really fast, and I think that kind of hurt the story. Maybe I would have liked it more if I read it before normal people. Maybe I would have liked it if I read it younger. I don't know. My only concern is that if I had read it when I was younger, I would think a lot of the comments towards Park and his Asian identity were okay. They're not okay. So, on a much happier note, the next book that I read is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. Don't know if I pronounced your last name right. I'm sorry, Genevieve. I love you. I think you're a phenomenal author. I gave it 5 stars. I would give it 100 stars. I would give it 1,000,000 stars if I could. It deserves all the stars in the universe. If you don't know what that's about, it's a retelling of Norse mythology, which, you know me, I love Norse mythology. It's essentially a retelling of a lot of Norse mythology, particularly events that include Loki, because it's told through the perspective of Angerboda, who is one of Loki's wives. She is the mother of the 3 children that are considered the monsters of Norse mythology, the ones most important for Ragnarok. I feel like I've explained what all of these are in the last video. I'm not gonna explain. If you would like me to explain, leave a comment. I'll just talk to you below. But yeah, Angerboda is the mother of monsters and one of Loki's wives, and she's not really talked about in Norse mythology. She really just exists to be the mother of monsters, and then once those children are sort of ripped away from her, she just doesn't appear again, which was a bummer for me. I always wanted to know more about her, and it feels like Genevieve heard my cry. Thank you. What I particularly loved about this story is that it's very clear that Genevieve Gornichek has a love for Norse mythology. It's a passion project. It just made me feel happy, and I could tell that she had fun writing it, and that's the kind of book that I love to read. And with her really loving Norse mythology, there's sort of this like picking apart of it and making fun of it at times and analyzing it and being really critical at times, but still having it be a celebration of these stories that have been told for thousands of years. And I loved that. I loved it. The story also portrays Loki with a complexity that is really refreshing. And this is where Sunny Tyler, I'm so sorry if I forgot your name. This is where Sunny's comment comes in, because on the last video they talked about how a lot of portrayals of Loki are reduced to the trickster evil character, and how at first, you know, he might have been a bit lighter and less harmful, but there was always this like evil underneath, and it just gets revealed later. You know, there's some acknowledgement of his relationship with the Aesir and him not being one, but wanting to be one and wanting to fit in, and that bitterness that ensues, how that relates to him, you know, becoming more evil. But it really is set up as like he was always this bad, and this is just his inevitable, you know, path. But here, it's really a lot more than that. And I think it's because it was in the perspective of someone who loves him. We get none of his point of view. The entire book is in Angrboda's point of view. But she understands him so well. And it feels like we get to have that understanding of him. Sometimes she knows him better than he even knows himself, which is... that's a normal thing in a relationship, honestly. And so it makes the path that he takes a lot more interesting and heartbreaking, because it starts with him just spending less time with Angrboda and starting to prioritize wanting to be accepted in the Aesir, and he just becomes less of a person that she understands, and so less of a person that we understand. And it's just the familiar feeling of watching someone that you love just sort of drift away from you and not really being able to stop it. And that was a much different perspective than just watching Loki be evil. We can see that he loves his family. We can see that he wants more for himself, but he also recognizes that he has a role in other people's lives. And that was an exploration of his identity as a father that I think is really missing from a lot of stories about him. Speaking of complexity of characters, another character that was portrayed, I think, really interestingly was Sigyn. So in my last video, and again, Sunny commented on this as well, I talked about how Sigyn sometimes gets reduced to the abused housewife, which she's not. And so here, she's not treated as the weak one. She's not the weak wife out of the two. She's not the forgotten one. She's one of Loki's wives, yes, but she is given much more agency, just like Angrboda is. And it's really cool to see. And what was most interesting to me, so I love Sigyn, and I always look forward to seeing any representations of her. And in this book, in the beginning, she's actually really unlikable, which, narratively makes sense. Angrboda is Loki's first wife, and she's kept a secret, and suddenly he marries this other woman, and it seems like he's prioritizing her over the family that she has with Loki. And there's this hatred that we get painted over our impression with Sigyn, and Sigyn is kept in the dark about Angrboda. So when she finds out about Angrboda, she's acting really standoffish and really rude, and this is our first impression of her. And I think that choice was amazing. A lot of depictions of Sigyn portray her as this perfect woman, and that's because she stands by Loki, and because it really seems like she doesn't have a backbone, which she does. That's why she makes the choices that she makes. And so to have her first impression be one of this sarcastic, snarky, jumping to conclusions, closed-minded woman is really interesting. And I love that it doesn't stay that way. Genevieve Gornichek makes the choice to not have these women be complete enemies throughout the whole story, because they're not. They just think they are, with them both trying to fight for the #1 spot in Loki's life. And I am really pleased with the fact that their relationship with Loki and with each other and with the world around them is not limited to, I want this man. And by the end, they have a somewhat understanding of each other. They're not besties, which is fine. But they're not reduced to a cat fight the whole time, which, again, lovely, wonderful. Genevieve Gornichek takes so many events that people have told over and over again and tells them with this refreshing new perspective that makes them feel new. Even though I knew where the story was going for the most part, not for the most part, I knew where the story was going, but the details that were filled in and the way in which the end was told, I sobbed. I was full on crying for like the last 100 pages or so, and that's the only time that I've ever cried that long for a book. There's also a very surprising woman-woman relationship. I thought that was really fun to read. It was hinted at first, kind of as a joke, and then it became a thing, and I thought that was really fun. It, again, was one of the reasons why I felt the end impacted me so strongly. I'm not gonna spoil who it's between. I just thought it was lovely. Another relationship that I thought really made this book special to me was Angrboda's love for her children. Again, I talked about how exploring Loki's identity as a father was really important and something that isn't really done, but to explore Angrboda's relationship as a mother was also really important. I mean, like I said, Angrboda is reduced to just being the mother of these monsters, but she's not really seen having a relationship with them. I know we lost a lot of texts that depict Norse mythology, and we really depend on the two sources that we have, so who knows if she was talked about more, but to have her love for her children take such a prominent role, and to see her fight for her children even when they're taken from her and when it seems like she'll never see them again and all hope is lost, and her children's response is to shut down and shut her out. And it's a really beautiful and powerful account of motherhood. And when I finished the book, I texted my mom and I said, I love you. This book felt like I was reading the epitome of my mom's love, and I thought that was just really fun. So finally, the third book that I read was American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I gave this 3.5 stars. I rounded it up to a 4-star on Goodreads just because I enjoyed it. I will note that I specifically read the 10th anniversary edition, which is slightly different from the original text. In the 10th anniversary edition, Neil Gaiman sort of re-includes scenes that were cut out from the first publication of the story, and he sort of reworks them in so that he can keep his favorites and still have the story make sense. So I think that did affect my view on the story, but I will start and say that the prose was really beautiful and gave the story a magical, mysterious sort of vibe to it. And it was really fun to see figures of mythology that I'm familiar with, as well as a bunch that I'm not. And so I got to learn, and that's always really fun. So with the prose being sort of mysterious and having a story like, I mean, obviously it's a story, but having like a storyteller like vibe to it, it was really great, but it also made me feel a little disconnected from the story at times. The text sort of starts to ramble off sometimes as the narrator will start to get philosophical about events that are happening, and so it made the text a lot longer than it really needed to be. I'm sorry, Neil Gaiman. I found myself forgetting a lot of the details, and so something would come up and I'd be like, what was that? Oh yeah, that was mentioned. That was before this whole ramble. And so that made it really hard to keep track of what was going on. I know the main character also has a lot of trouble keeping track of what's going on, because he's thrown into this world. I forgot to say what this book is about. Some context would be useful. So this book follows a man named Shadow, who is just getting out of prison. He was imprisoned for 3 years. He is being let out early, and the day that he's being let out, his wife dies in a car accident. So he's kind of left on his own, and he meets a stranger who employs him to become his sort of bodyguard, errand boy, and suddenly Shadow gets thrown into a war between the old gods and new gods. And these new gods are essentially technology and all of these modern things that people dedicate their time to and sort of worship more than they now worship these old mythological gods. So, like I said, Shadow doesn't really know a lot of what's happening because he just gets sort of thrown into this world. And he takes it all in stride. He's really laid back about everything, which they acknowledge a couple times. And it is really fun to read a character who's like, oh, I guess we're doing this now, okay. But it also makes things hard to keep track of what's happening because of his lack of reaction to a lot of things. And so a detail that might be important later is sort of missed in my brain because I just thought it wasn't important. And I was like, okay, yeah, that happened. All right, we're moving on because there's more other things that are happening and this book is so long. I really loved the insight that Gaiman includes in this book on how spirituality has changed. And he sort of plays with the idea that America in particular has something special and interesting about it in terms of it getting its identity from being a place where so many different people can gather and they bring their culture and they bring their gods with them. And so he plays with the identity of these gods in a way where they have their own American identities that are different from the identities they have back in their home country. And that was really interesting to see. It was just a really fun detail that gets played with in a lot of interesting ways. So I've read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, and reading this, I noticed some patterns on how he portrays Loki, which again, bringing it back to Sunny Tyler, your comment on how people portray Loki, especially Neil Gaiman. He always recognizes that because Loki is really clever, he has layers, and he also understands the layers of a situation so that he can manipulate it. But beyond that, in this story, Loki is treated as just the bad guy. I mean, I am picking on this not because I love Loki, but I mean, I do love Loki, but also because narratively it didn't make sense. We see him in the very beginning and at the very end. And in the very beginning, he does a lot of things that aid Shadow. I'm really trying not to spoil. It's probably going to be really obvious what I'm talking about. But he does a lot of things that pretty much equips Shadow with what he needs during his journey. And then at the end, it leads to Loki's own demise. And I'm like, why did you do that? Like, he's very clever. And that is talked about in the book. And it just seems like a plot point. Like, it's just like a convenience thing that Loki is the only one who can really push Shadow to doing certain things. And they try to justify it as like, Loki's doing that so that Shadow can be useful in this war. But I guess he makes Shadow a little too useful. I don't know. I just thought it was a weird move. And it could have been done with another trickster character, honestly. A lot to choose from. I don't know. Sunny Tyler had just mentioned that Neil Gaiman sort of maybe not started this perception. Him and Marvel's portrayal of Loki are kind of the same. in that they sort of present Loki as just the big bad and everyone around him as the victims in his life. And because he's the trickster, it's always more harmful because he's not straight up about it, and you know, there's always this, like I said before, evil simmering underneath. I will say that's changing in Marvel. If you want to hear more about that, I made a video. This was for school. I had a project on this my senior year of high school, and I essentially talked about why the timeline of Loki's portrayal as a character in the Marvel Universe reflects how we think about good and bad. So if you want to look at that, click here. I'll link it. Maybe, wait, I don't know. Maybe it'll be up here in the card. Here? It'll be somewhere. It'll also be in the description below if you would like to hear me talk about Loki for like 30 minutes. Which I already do. You're already here for that. Go watch that video. American Gods was interesting. It was a ride. And if you've read it, let me know what you think about the endings. Because there's the ending, there's the epilogue, and then there's like the afterword or whatever. Let me know what you think about that, because I'm still processing. I don't really know if I liked it, if it made sense. I don't know. I just don't know. That's why this book is a 3.5. It honestly might be a 3. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to reread. I'll have to reread it, but read the original. Maybe that's what I'll do. I also thought it was fun that in the end there was like a 10th Doctor regeneration version epilogue where like Shadow like goes back and secretly like visits the people that he met on the journey. That was fun. Did it have anything to do with the story? Not really. I feel like that was intentional. That was a Doctor Who reference. Also, that scene with Jesus that Neil Gaiman was like, this didn't fit anywhere. That totally fits somewhere. Neil Gaiman includes some texts, like just paragraphs of things that really didn't need to be in there, but that Jesus scene, that was so interesting. That in itself was a commentary on, again, exploring a God's identity and how human beings have such different interpretations of gods that their identity is spread thin, basically, because they have to be all things to all people. That was such a good scene. Like, the whole book has such important message is on how America treats its gods. And there's just a lack of America's biggest god. They mentioned Jesus in the main story like one time just to say like, oh yeah, he was a really lucky dude. It's like, haha, that's funny. But can we acknowledge that like if you're gonna write a story about America, you have to acknowledge the just complete dousing of Christianity that like all of this country has in its history? That scene fit in there. It didn't maybe fit where he originally intended it, but it belonged there. Anyway, so that's my video on books I've read recently. I'm really excited to just be filming again. I have this lovely new ring light too, so it makes me feel special and like I have cool videos now. So maybe I'll do more. I don't know, hopefully. I've just missed talking. I like hearing myself talk. I've missed giving myself opportunities to hear myself talk. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I'll link it below. I also have joined Pango Books, which is a fun secondhand online bookstore where you can like sell your books and buy other people's books. So I set up a little bookshop there. I don't have many things on it right now, but because I get a lot of free books from the library that I work at, I was thinking of just selling it there. I'm really not trying to make money off of people that much. I just am trying to get rid of my books and make sure that they go somewhere that they'll actually be read and cared for. So if you want to look at my little store, I'll link that down below as well. Yeah, I hope you all are having a really good day. Please remember to take care of yourselves because you're very loved. And yeah, I have to figure out a new outro because I didn't really like the old one, and I really want to rebrand this channel. Okay, bye!